Henry Ford and the Assembly Line. Henry Ford, Section 1. Henry Ford first saw a gasoline-powered horseless carriage at the 1893 World's Fair. They had already been invented in Europe. After seeing these, Henry became obsessed with building automobiles. In 1903, he began the Ford Motor Company. This was his third attempt at creating a car company, so he knew he needed to do something different to succeed. Ford's first horseless carriage was called the quadricycle. Other models of automobiles afterward were named after letters of the alphabet, each one improving upon the last. The Model N car was made in 1907. It cost less than most other cars and became the best-selling car in the country. However, Ford was not satisfied and wanted to make an even better car at an even lower price. Model T, Section 2. Ford worked with his best mechanics to build a car that the average American could afford. In 1908, they built a Model T. Teams of workers moved from station to station to perform tasks to assemble the car. Ford's workers took 12 hours to build the car this way, which he thought was too slow. He remembered visiting the Sears Roebuck and Company factory in 1906 in Chicago, Illinois, and what he had learned there. There, he saw time-saving technology throughout the plant, such as conveyors, gravity chutes, elevators, and moving sidewalks. Ford took time-saving ideas from Sears, as well as the meat processing and canning industries in Chicago. Ford returned to Detroit, Michigan, to make plans for improving production at his car plant. Assembly Line, Section 3. Ford hired experts in manufacturing to create a new system to build the Model T. The modern Highland Park Ford plant opened in 1910 just outside of Detroit, Michigan. It had electrical power and lights so workers could build cars when it was dark outside. The assembly line divided the work into parts or separate steps. Workers did the same job, or a single step in the process, over and over again, instead of working on many different steps to build an entire car. The workers stayed in one place, and the parts moved to them. The parts moved on conveyor belts and gravity slides from one worker to the next. Gravity slides allowed parts to be sent from higher levels in the factory to lower levels in the factory. The assembly line allowed Ford's workers to make entire cars in 93 minutes instead of in 12 hours. This meant that he had more cars to sell so that he could make them cheaper. The price of the Model T Ford dropped to $490 by 1914. Assembly line work was tedious or boring, as it had the same step over and over again all day long. Because of this, and people wanted to quit working, Ford increased pay to $5 per day and made the work week a standard 40 hours. This was a huge pay raise and less time each week to work than in previous years. Due to these changes, many people now wanted to work for Henry Ford. Interchangeable parts, Section 4. The Ford plant started using interchangeable parts that could be replaced with one another. Before this, parts did not always fit together properly. Workers had to hand fit or change many of the parts during the assembly of a car. Taking the time at the last minute to sand, cut, or file down a part while building a car slowed down the overall process. By making the parts identical and interchangeable, production increased. Single-purpose machines at the Ford factory increased the speed of production. Arrangement, Section 5. Ford placed machines along the assembly line in the order they were used. Other factories grouped all the same type of machinery. Ford's arrangement meant that workers did not have to leave their area to use tools and equipment. Time, Section 6. Ford's car plant had a time study department that broke jobs down into small tasks that needed to be completed in nearly equal time. The department timed workers any time a part was changed. Workers were pressured to work faster and faster. Any problems at the car plant were addressed quickly. Problem solvers hopped on bicycles kept in the factory ground and rushed to take care of issues. The time-saving procedures were effective, and Model T Fords were rolling off the assembly line faster and faster. Ford's assembly line eventually produced a Model T car every 24 seconds. More than 15 million Model T cars had been sold by 1927. This made up half of all cars sold in the United States at that point in history. The chart you have from years 1909 down to 1916, and the price of the car starting at $950 in 1909, lowering to $360 in 1916. Number of cars produced, 1909, 13,840, up to 585,388. Number of cars sold, 12,292 in 1909, 577,036 cars sold in 1916. Section 7. Impact. Ford Motor Company used its assembly lines to produce tools of war, such as military airplanes and jeeps, in the 1940s during World War II. The military demanded improvements in war machines, as the wartime demands changed. Assembly lines had to become flexible and change with necessary needs. Manufacturers used Henry Ford's new technologies of interchangeable parts and the assembly line to produce other household items after the war. The mass production of the Model T made owning a car affordable for average Americans. This was Henry Ford's main reason for making the Model T. He wanted to change lives by making cars cheaper and more affordable. If people owned their own cars, they would have more freedom to travel. They were no longer dependent on trains. Cars connected rural areas in the country with big cities. This also allowed people to settle outside of big cities in smaller populated areas called suburbs. Ford was proud of the success of the assembly line, and he was willing to share his technology with other companies. Household items such as radios and vacuum cleaners were produced on assembly lines within 10 years of Ford inventing the assembly line. Farmers also used automatic technology, such as milking machines for cows, to increase their production. Simply put, Henry Ford revolutionized factories with his assembly line system.